The heat pressed down on the village, turning the air into a thick, shimmering haze. Adani gripped the handlebars, her knuckles white against the rusted metal. She pushed hard, her sneakers driving the pedals down, but the bicycle groaned under the strain. Dust rose in choking clouds, coating the road. Dust rose in choking clouds, coating the road and everything near it in a fine gray film. She leaned forward, muscles burning, trying to maintain speed. Suddenly, the chain slipped with a sharp, metallic snap. The bike lurched, throwing her balance off. She slammed her foot down to catch herself. The silence of the dying fields rushed in to fill the space where the rhythmic clicking had been. She stood there, chest heaving, listening to the dry wind. She did not look back. She kicked the chain back into place, wiped the grit from her forehead, and mounted the frame once more. Her legs pumped with renewed force, driving the wheels forward through the heat. She reached the boundary where the village road dissolved into the wild. She slowed, the tires carving deep, jagged grooves into the parched earth, and came to a complete stop at the edge of the unknown. The tree line loomed, a wall of dense, tangled shadows that seemed to swallow the light. Adani straddled the bike, her eyes scanning the dark perimeter. She prepared to turn back, but then a sharp, rhythmic glint pierced the gloom. It was not the erratic flicker of sunlight on leaves. It was steady, deliberate. She squinted, trying to dismiss it as a trick of the heat, yet the light pulsed again, pulling her gaze deeper into the brush. She let the bicycle fall into the dirt and stepped off the path. The brush clawed at her legs, thick and unyielding. She pushed through, snapping dry twigs that sounded like bone under her weight. The air here was cooler, smelling of damp earth and rot. She moved deeper, following the rhythm of the light until she reached a small, cleared patch of soil. There, half buried in the dirt, sat a jagged piece of ancient stone. It was not a rock. It was a fragment of something deliberate. Intricate, swirling symbols carved into its surface caught the dim light, glowing with a faint, rhythmic pulse. She knelt, her breath hitching as she stared at the patterns. The light didn't just sit on the stone, it seemed to breathe. She reached out, her hand hovering just inches from the rough, cold surface. Her fingertips brushed the rough, uneven surface. The stone felt like ice, a sharp, biting cold that traveled instantly up her fingers. She flinched, but her hand did not pull away. A low, rhythmic hum began to vibrate through the air, then through her skin, rattling the bones in her wrist. The sound was deep, like a heartbeat trapped beneath the soil. Suddenly, the cold vanished. A surge of intense, dry heat erupted from the stone, scorching her palm. It was not a burning fire, but a pressure, a physical weight that pushed against her nerves. She tried to jerk her hand back, but her muscles refused to obey. The vibration grew violent, shaking her entire arm. The swirling symbols on the surface flared, the light turning from a faint pulse to a blinding, steady glow. She felt the heat travel up her arm, settling into her chest, a heavy, rhythmic thrumming that matched her own pulse. She gasped, her breath hitching, as the stone seemed to draw the very air from her lungs. The ground beneath her knees trembled in sympathy with the object. She finally wrenched her fingers free, falling back into the dirt. Her palm was marked with a faint, glowing outline of the symbols. She stared at her hand. Adani shoved the stone deep into her pocket. The heat remained, a persistent, throbbing weight against her thigh as she sprinted back to the village. She burst through the door of her home, expecting the usual quiet of the afternoon. Instead, the air felt thick, stagnant, and heavy. Her younger sister sat in the center of the room, surrounded by a chaotic pile of wooden toys. The girl was laughing. It was a high, jagged sound that scraped against the walls. She was gesturing wildly at the empty air, her eyes wide and unfocused, pointing at corners where nothing stood. Adani took a step forward, her voice catching in her throat as she called out, but the laughter only grew louder, more frantic. The girl began to rock back and forth, her hands clawing at the floorboards, completely unresponsive to the world around her. Adani reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around the cold, pulsating edges of the stone. The moment her skin made contact with the carvings, she squeezed. The laughter stopped. It did not fade. It vanished instantly, as if cut by a blade. Her sister slumped forward, her eyes rolling back as she went limp. Adani stood frozen, her hands still gripping the stone. The next morning, the village air tasted different. It was sharp, metallic, and damp. Adani walked toward the center of the square, her hand resting on the stone in her pocket. The village, well, a dry, cracked pit for months, stood silent. Then, a low rumble vibrated through the soles of her feet. The earth around the stone rim began to fracture, spider webbing outward as if pushed from below. Dust puffed up from the cracks, followed by a sudden, hollow sound of rushing air. Adani backed away, her boots skidding on the loose gravel. The ground groaned. A dark, damp stain appeared at the bottom of the pit, spreading rapidly across the parched floor. Then, the water surged. It did not trickle, it erupted. Crystal clear liquid slammed against the stone walls, rising with terrifying speed. It spilled over the rim, soaking the dry, gray earth in seconds. The villagers began to emerge, their faces pale, staring at the impossible sight of the overflowing well. The water flowed in rivulets, carving new paths through the dust, turning the hard, dead soil into dark, wet mud. Adani stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the water reclaim the land. The village was no longer silent. Adani watched the water pool around her feet, but her focus drifted back to the weight in her pocket. She reached in and pulled the stone into the open air. The sunlight hit the surface, and the carvings flared with a sudden, brilliant intensity. As her thumb traced the jagged, ancient grooves, the world around her seemed to tilt. A sound began to bleed into her consciousness, rising from the stone itself. It was a melody, haunting and familiar, a song her grandfather used to hum while sitting by the dying embers of the fire. The notes were sharp, clear, and layered, weaving through her mind like a physical presence. She tried to pull her hand away, but the stone pulsed, locking her fingers in place. The melody grew louder, drowning out the roar of the well and the murmurs of the gathered villagers. It was not just a song, it was a sequence, a rhythm that demanded a specific destination. She looked toward the edge of the village, where the massive banyan tree stood against the sky. The stone hummed in sync with her own heartbeat, vibrating with a desperate, urgent heat. She understood then. This was not a relic to be kept or studied, it was a key. The song reached a crescendo, pushing her forward, forcing her legs to move. She turned away from the well and began to run toward the roots of the banyan tree. Adani reached the banyan tree, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The massive trunk loomed above her, its gnarled roots twisting into the ground like frozen serpents. She dropped to her knees, the dry, compacted earth biting into her skin. She began to dig. Her fingers clawed at the dirt, but the ground was stubborn, baked hard by years of drought. She grabbed a jagged shard of flint from the base of the tree and hammered it into the soil. The impact jarred her arm, sending a shockwave of pain through her shoulder, but she did not stop. She pried at the earth, throwing handfuls of dust aside until a deep, narrow hollow opened between the thickest roots. The stone in her hand grew hot, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the frantic beating of her heart. She ignored the grit under her fingernails and the sweat stinging her eyes. With trembling fingers, she pressed the stone into the dark earth. She pushed it down, burying it deep until the last flicker of its light vanished. The silence lasted only a heartbeat. Then, the ground beneath the banyan tree buckled. A hairline fracture appeared in the soil, glowing with a fierce, blinding gold. The light did not just shine, it erupted. It tore through the earth like a living pulse, racing along the gnarled roots and diving deep into the parched ground. Adani scrambled back as the light surged outward, carving glowing veins into the dry landscape. It moved with terrifying speed, tearing across the fields where the wheat had withered. Everywhere the light touched, the gray, cracked earth shattered, replaced by a sudden, violent surge of green. The energy hit the village houses, climbing the walls and spilling through the doorways. The transformation was absolute. The golden veins pulsed once, twice, and then held, bathing the entire valley in a steady, shimmering glow. The blinding gold faded, leaving behind the soft, amber glow of a new morning. Adani stood up, her knees stiff, and brushed the dirt from her palms. The silence was no longer heavy, it was filled with the sound of water. She turned toward the village well. The stone rim was no longer dry and jagged. Water spilled over the edges, carving dark, wet paths into the soil, pooling in the basin where the dust had sat for months. She walked toward the center of the village. The air felt different, cool and sharp, smelling of wet earth and waking life. Where the wheat fields had been gray and brittle, green stalks now swayed in a gentle breeze. The color was returning to the world, a slow, steady tide of emerald and gold. She passed the houses, doors stood open, and the stillness of the morning was broken by the distant call of a bird. She reached the edge of the road where she had started. The path was firm, no longer crumbling under her weight. She looked back at the banyan tree. It stood tall, its leaves rustling with a vitality that had been absent for years. The sun climbed higher, casting long, clear shadows. Adani watched the light. The village had breathed again.